Why are we still referring to the Warren Commission when we talk about JFK assassination?
Because the media still believes it.
What's the matter with the media, the mainstream media, though?
Well, this is a very good question. It's a larger question than even the Kennedy killing. The Kennedy killing is a major crime, the biggest one of the American century, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But there's so many other things that have been covered up.
Why some people are still not
This
convinced?
is a historical problem. Historians will, some of them will admit it gradually, but once they lock in, it's very hard for a historian to go back.
Yeah.
Psychological torture that we're going through at the hands of our own government.
I know, and it's all legal. They do whatever they want.
And the Canadians are just as bad.
Oh my God, don't get me started. Don't get me started.
Oliver Stone is one of my favorite directors. In the 90s, he did the movie called JFK, and 30 years later, he decided to do a documentary about this subject called JFK Revisited. I met him and James DiEugenio, his screenwriter, at his house.
Oliver, Jim, thanks for accepting my invitation. Today we're talking about the documentary JFK Revisited. So in 1991 came out the movie JFK, and 30 years later, so late 2021, you released this documentary. Can you tell us why you decided to make this documentary, and how did you work together? How did you meet, actually?
Well, I guess I should start because I was there before you, right?
Mm-hmm.
In 91, the film was a tremendous surprise hit all around the world. There was no country that didn't go for it. It was amazing. And people were surprised because it was a long film. It was 3 hours and eight minutes. So a lot of people were quite shocked that we did so well for a long film. It's hard to make money when you make a long film like that. So the picture created tremendous opposition too, as well as enthusiasm. The opposition created a controversy. They called me all kinds of names. As a result, there was the Assassination Congress under pressure passed the what's it called?
The Assassination Records Review Board.
The assassination, these bureaucracy talk. Assassination Records Review Board, which is amazing. It was an investigation essentially, but they didn't have any power or money, big money. They had a few years to run. They didn't really call a lot of people, but they called some ancient figures back. They got a lot of information still, in spite of the circumstances that were set up. They had some good investigators, am I correct?
Yeah.
And among them was
Doug Horn.
Doug Horn was the ballistics guy. And they basically worked from 94 to 97, and then
98.
94 to 98, and they were closed down by Congress because they didn't really want to get into this. It's a messy story. Mm-hmm. And they found a lot of stuff. They got a lot of documents out. How many?
About 2 million. 2 million pages.
2 million documents.
Following your movie,
yes.
Am I correct? Yeah.
2 million
All
pages.
this is new information in this documentary we made. So what was the story? Well, how much was left that we know did not come out?
As of today, 15,000 pages.
15,000 pages?
Yes.
Okay. I want to make the point that as of today, it's still a mess because they're breaking the law, and there's been a lawsuit filed give us the details.
Bill Simpich up in Northern California has filed a lawsuit.
Who's breaking the law when you said they're breaking
the law? They were supposed to release the whole thing back when? In
2017.
That was the date.
And Trump did not.
He did not.
He broke the law when he did that. Then Biden came into office, and he never carried through
exactly
what he was supposed to do by law. Instead, he declared that this was a COVID emergency and delayed it further. Okay, but truthfully, this is a violation of what was intended by Congress and by the American people.
But what happened, though? Why did Trump change his mind? Because he tweeted about it.
Well, you'd have to talk to Trump because
I'm
not sure he remembers much, but he was boasting about this. You know, Trump was boasting that he would solve the JFK case and clean it all up. And
exactly.
Of course, when the push came to shove and it was at the 11th hour, he got some kind of pressure and he backed off.
Do we know what?
He got visits from CIA and FBI or whatever. We don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know.
For a fact.
But he just backed off and he sealed it.
For how long?
And then Biden didn't do anything at all except declare this COVID thing. So here we are,
Trump
3 years
did it
later.
twice. He delayed it twice. First, he said he was going to delay it for 6 months. Then when that was over, he said he was going to delay it for another 2.5 years.
But how do you explain that, though?
Well, what usually happens is that like he said, the FBI and the CIA goes into the Oval Office and they essentially say something like, look, if you do this, you're going to expose these operations. You're going to expose our agents in place. There's going to be blood on your hands.
Right.
And we will tell the media about it.
All these are 60 years later. These agents are dead.
Exactly.
These
So
are
what's
CIA.
the big
We are
deal?
concerned not with living agents. We're concerned with CIA agents who are working around the Cuban operations.
Right.
There was a tremendous operation, a huge army of people down in Florida and
Yeah.
various places trying to get rid of Castro
Yeah.
and task forces. This was a big operation out of Miami, also Dallas, Houston, New Orleans. It was a network of Cuban groups that were sometimes in opposition to each other. but
Long
they all-
gone. They've been gone forever. So what's the big deal? Why can't we know now in 2020, 2025?
Well, you're naive. Why
I
can't we
guess
know?
I
What if
am.
they came out and said, okay, well, yeah, he was killed by a bunch of crazy Cubans and CIA agents who lost their minds back in 1960.
Well, at least
you
we
think
know
they
the
would
truth.
Do that?
I
you
wish
think the government
no, they
admits
wouldn't.
anything that could be in any way make it vulnerable? No, the government is very, very, very fake. It's like an army. The Pentagon. If you get the truth out of the Pentagon, God bless you. You know, you can't. You know, for example, the Pentagon, when people are killed by friendly fire, which happens a lot. I saw combat a lot. I would say 15 to 20% of the people in Vietnam were killed that way. Well, they still are covering it up because they don't admit friendly fire. Everybody gets into trouble. Yeah. And the kid who got killed out of the Arizona Cardinals, the defensive back, he was a very
I can't remember his name. I know you were talking about it.
Pat Tillman.
That's it, yeah.
He was great. He was killed by friendly fire, and they buried it.
No one knows about
well,
it.
because they don't want to get sued by the families.
For sure.
And of course, they don't even pay insurance when you get killed by friendly fire.
Wow.
It's the same kind of mentality that
Right.
you can't admit. This is a very embarrassing thing. President Kennedy was killed by friendly fire, and right in the heart of Dallas, okay? There's no
Terrible.
question about that. And
See, in the film, we had this wonderful exchange between him and John Thunheim, who was the chairman of the review board. And John Thunheim tells this story about the first time the CIA came in. And Thunheim put this document on the screen. And he says, what on earth could you object to in releasing that document in the 90s? And the CIA guy goes, he paused for about 15 seconds. He goes, I'm not sure, but give me about 2 more minutes and I'll think of something.
You say that in the documentary.
Yeah,
We see that.
that's
yeah.
the kind of arrogance. But I'll tell you a story that we didn't put in. The FBI came in, and the FBI liaison came in with an FBI lawyer, okay? And Thunheim did the same thing. He goes, we're going to declassify this thing unless you give us a rock-solid argument against it, all right? And the FBI liaison turns to the FBI lawyer, and he goes, can they really do that? He goes, yes, they can.
They do whatever, right? They do whatever
See,
they
this
want.
is the kind of, and I'm sure Oliver agrees, this is just the kind of arrogance,
Right.
you know, that they've had about this secrecy for years on end. And here comes the review board and says, no, we are going to declassify this stuff.
Well, they did.
Yes, they did,
The
yeah.
majority of files were declassified, so
Yeah.
that's good news.
But here we are in 2022, and these guys have to file a lawsuit to
Right.
get the rest of the document. We have to sue the President of the United States.
It's insane.
You know?
So how did you? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about you, Jim, because not everybody knows you. So you have a website called Kennedys and King.
Yeah, kennedysandking.com,
Can you
yeah.
tell us more about that and your
Yeah.
mission?
So we felt that there wasn't anybody who was publicizing these new documents that were coming out of the archives. In fact, that's one of the reasons we made the movie, is because the media didn't acknowledge any of this bombshell stuff that was coming out of these documents that the review board was releasing.
when we made the movie, it was off Jim Garrison's book, On the Trail of the Assassins. I wanted to make a dramatic movie, somewhat like Z, which was one of my favorite pictures in film school, the Costa Gavras film about the Greek coup d'etat back in 1967. Similar structure.
Right.
So I made a tense, very tense, as tense as I could. I made it a suspenseful movie. I wasn't thinking about documents, this, and I did a lot of research. But research, you got to, when you make a movie like this, you let it all go. You got to make a movie that's exciting.
Yeah.
Okay, I make the movie, and then at the end of the whole process, and it's just a very tough process, our publicist Steve Rivers, who's no longer with us, said, let's make a point at the end of the movie. Let's put a little signifier saying that all the files have not been released. I have never thought of that. I mean, okay, sure, we know that there's a million files that have not been released. So we put it at the end of the movie as an afterthought. Yeah. That little disclaimer was seen by the audience and provoked their outrage at the government. So basically, that comes out of an afterthought.
Wow, fascinating.
See, his film, that trailer, that crawler at the end, that shocked a lot of people.
Yeah,
and in fact, I'll tell you exactly what happened. Is that Louis Stokes, who was the chairman of the House Select Committee, went to see the movie with his daughter. Okay, and then after the movie, as they're walking out, she turns to him and says, "Dad, why'd you do that?"
The children will change the fate of this.
And so he went in to see the review board, okay? And he said, if you do any special investigation, do one of the medical evidence, because nobody was happy on our
Stokes
committee.
Had been on the House.
Yeah, no one was happy with the investigation that we did.
So you started when did you start investigating?
This started back in the 90s.
Okay.
We had originally a paper publication.
Okay.
And then we turned it into a HTML, online thing. Okay. And so we really wanted to publicize these new documents.
Right.
Since the mainstream media all but ignored them. Okay. And so what we were trying to show in a roundabout way, that all the criticism that Oliver took, for a period of about 10 months, it was nonstop, all the way to the Academy Awards. All right, and so I see, as a sidelight, that movie should have won 5 or 6 Academy Awards, okay? Because of the bad publicity, only won 2, all right? But we wanted to show that he wasn't in left field.
Yeah.
He was somewhere like on the infield. He was like playing shortstop.
After the movie came out, you can imagine the amount of mail I got. I mean, boxes and boxes.
Yeah.
Some good, some horrible, but it was quite. And Jim was another one of these people who really had followed the assassination for a long time. And this group is very important to the structure of what's happened, because they are the citizens of America, are without government support, are the ones who cared. And they cared so much that they devoted years and years of their lives to working in this sort of informal network that has grown up of researchers.
Yeah.
And they check each other out, and obviously there's people who don't agree, and there's all kinds of wild things that get into there. But generally speaking, there's a body of research that is pretty solid. And I think Jim, in many ways, represents the mainstream of that. And when I read the various researchers, what they wrote, I settled on Jim as a new generation, a younger person. He wasn't like, some of these people were very old. Mark Lane was one of the best. He was the original. And I very much admired Mark. And I think he was right in the very beginning. He got it on day 1 or day 2. But in this generation, Jim was comfortable, and I felt like we could really make something work with him. He worked with, we had a researcher on the film, Jane Rusconi, who was not as expert as Jim, but she did a great job. And Jim took over in the sense of continuing to do the research after the movie had come out. And there was a lot of things happening after the movie. You can imagine all the villains who saw the movie and who said, "Oh shit," or the doctors who said, "Oh, I wish I had been more honest," or this or that.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, a lot of people did start to talk, like Charles Crenshaw, the medical doctor at Parkland, wrote the wonderful book about, very determined to show that even at Parkland they knew that he'd been shot from the rear.
So in 1991, the movie came out, and I didn't live in the US back then, but what was the impact it had on public opinion about JFK assassination?
I've said this before, and I'll say it again. No film in the history of cinema ever had the socio-political impact that JFK did. And I'll stand by that.
Not even Platoon?
Okay,
You don't
no,
think so?
nothing ever had. I mean, he was getting, can you imagine this? His movie's not out yet. They're attacking him 7 months before the movie came out. Okay?
This is because the media has been complicit in this assassination, and I'm sorry to, it's part of waking
That's
up.
very important, though.
Very important.
Yeah.
The media, why did they, from day one, why did they fall for this? Why did they go
Exactly.
along with the story? The Warren Report comes out, and already you have the New York Times in advance getting copies and putting out this bogus thing that the Warren Commission is legitimate, believable, and so forth and so on. And when everybody gets like that, and the New York Times does that, and the Washington Post does that, it's very hard to be a journalist working upstream. In other words, you're going against your editors.
Yeah.
You're going against, you don't give a shot, and nobody will give you space.
No.
So the opposition to the Warren Commission was pushed to the side and to the margins, and they've been in the margins ever since. And every time some piece of a lead comes out, the media buries it and says, oh, this is all, another story. And a lot of good stuff has come out. That's what's important. And that's why we made the documentary, because there's too much valuable stuff in this ARRB report, much too much, that was never seen by the public. So in our film, you will see some of that, not all of it, and you will get what they learned. And this is crucial, because this really reopens the case. But they don't want to reopen the case, and they never will.
They never will?
Who's they? They is the Justice Department.
Right.
I mean, it's generally speaking part of the system.
And
to give you one example of that, he got hammered. Him, Fletcher Prouty, and John Newman got blistered because of this. Well, I don't think it was new, but it was relatively, fresh. This whole thesis about Vietnam, because what he was saying in his film was that, unlike what the historians tell you, Johnson did not continue Kennedy's policy in Vietnam. He reversed Kennedy's policy in Vietnam.
so that was news to American public.
Yes, that was to the general public. 95% of them never even heard of this. Okay, but then it wasn't that he just had the evidence from Fletcher Prouty and John Newman. Then in 1997, the review board declassified a whole set of documents from what's called the SecDef meeting of May 1963. You can't get any better than this. McNamara says, I want all the withdrawal schedules handed in to me right now. Okay? They hand them all in. McNamara leafs through them, turns to all the people there from the State Department, CIA, okay, and Pentagon, and says, this isn't fast enough. We're getting out sooner. All right? Now, I don't see how much better you can get than that, except what he questioned John Newman about in the film. I think it's in the long version of the film, where Newman actually listened to the debrief McNamara did when he was leaving office. And he says that he and Kennedy had decided that all America can do is advise, and we can train, and we can supply them with equipment. We cannot fight the war for them. And it doesn't matter if we're winning or if we're losing,
It's in the long
we're
version.
getting out at that time period. Okay? Now, really, how do you get any more convincing that kind of stuff?
Well, that's a good question. Why some people are still not convinced?
This is a historical problem. The historians some of them will admit it gradually, but once they lock in, it's very hard for a historian to go back.
Yeah.
Would you say? I mean, you've read most of the work on Vietnam.
Yeah.
I haven't read it all, but it's pretty sickening when you see that they make a line of continuation from Eisenhower to Kennedy to Johnson. The rap on Kennedy is, he did send advisors, 15,000 advisors to Vietnam, okay? Because he had to. He was under pressure, tremendous pressure, and he didn't know what he was getting into yet. The situation in Southeast Asia was not clear. Kennedy had a bigger problem with Laos than he did with Vietnam. So he stuck to one principle, which was what he learned as a young man. No, he didn't want American boots on the ground. He didn't want American interference. He knew in his heart that interference would backfire.
Right.
And this was true about Africa. This was true about other parts of Asia.
Yeah.
See, what
And the Middle
Oliver's
East.
film did is it opened up a window, okay? Well, wait a minute. Maybe Vietnam's not the only place. And so that's why in the film, we did Indonesia also, because I believe the same thing happened there.
Interesting.
Okay.
That's why you decided to bring Indonesia in the documentary.
We brought in like also the Middle East, okay? See, we spent a lot of time in the long version on the Algeria speech,
Yeah.
which I've always believed is just, that's a beacon in the night.
Which one is that?
The Algeria speech. Kennedy's Algeria speech, where he's saying we shouldn't be doing this. We should not be backing up this French Empire in the north coast of Africa. Don't we see what just happened in Vietnam 3 years ago? Look what happened in 1954. We want to do this all over again? No, we don't. Yeah. Okay? And that speech was relatively ignored also. And I'm really glad that we got one of the best guys, Richard Mahoney, who's a dean at North Carolina State, to talk about that. He was very eloquent, very articulate. One of our best interviews that we did.
So some of the historians are changing, but they're not writing in the mainstream. They're not given the editorials space that the usual suspects are.
Yeah.
It's the same as in Casablanca, actually. It's the same old story.
What's the matter with the
Fight
media?
for love and glory. What?
What's the matter with the media, the mainstream media, though?
Well, this is a very good question. It's a larger question than even the Kennedy killing. The Kennedy killing is a major crime, the biggest one of the American century, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But there's so many other things that have been covered up.
Exactly.
Including, of course, the origins of the Vietnam War, which came out much later after we'd been in battle. We know now about Johnson lying to get into the war. We know that Kennedy wanted to get out and was planning to, but he wanted to get elected to that second term. That's what gave him it gave him the confidence and the strength to really make the final pullout. And aside from Vietnam, there's other secrets. Empire secrets. This is an empire we're talking about. This is a huge empire. And there's things going on all the time everywhere in the world. So it's out of control in a sense. Nobody can police all the information that's there. But we can start. And the American historians are horrible in their negligence on this issue. I mean, you take the top people, they sit there for years, they write these books that are well reviewed. They're not getting it. They're missing the big picture.
How is it possible, though? Because, when we watch your documentary...
Well, Eloise, let me take this back a little bit.
Yeah.
When we were making the film...
When did you start making it?
Oh, God. When did we start? It was,
The documentary?
yeah,
I forgot.
2019.
About 2 years off and on.
Okay.
And he called me into his office and he said words to the effect, Jim, this movie's not going to make any noise. And I said, why do you say that?
Oliver said that?
Yeah, and I said, why do you say that? He goes, because I know the way the media works.
Right.
Okay? And so what reaction in America we did get from the big guys, like the Rolling Stone and the Washington Post, was negative. And the reason I've thought about this a lot, okay? You don't want to admit that, number one, you blew the story about the murder of President Kennedy. That's number one, they did. But number two, you don't want to admit that 3 months after the 26 volumes of the Warren Commission were published, Johnson was sending the first combat troops into Vietnam, and nobody connected those two dots, okay? Nobody did, And so what you get today, people like Robert Dallek, people like Frederick Logevall, and they essentially, if you want to get a good-selling book out there on President Kennedy, okay, you have to, do these kinds of things. You have to kind of like, let's say, not tell the whole story, all right?
This is important to realize. This is a commercial empire. It has to make money.
Right.
The empire is based on money, selling arms, as many arms as you can, keep expanding. War is good, creative destruction they call it. You wreck a place, you go and you rebuild it. You make money on both sides. In wrecking it, you make money because of the arms. In rebuilding it, you make money. So there's a kind of a cycle here that's going on. And I think America is very much behind the engine of this creative destruction going on all over the world. whether it's Bosnia, or whether it's Africa, whether it's Asia, Middle East above all, Iraq, a fortune, and now there's going to be another fortune made in Ukraine. So this is an ongoing sickness.
Yeah.
And unless we pick out the pattern, we're really being bad historians. You've got to find the pattern here. But it's so impossible when you get a media that is locked in. And I say it's a very conservative media. It's very conservative.
Yeah.
It's really hard to get new ideas into this. And we've been the victims of that. So as a result, the film, I was right. The film never got mainstream attention. There was some negative mention in two organs of it. But the major publications never really took the film seriously. They buried it. They didn't talk about it. We sold it on our own. Showtime sold it, and we also went to all the shows we could get on, and that's mostly alternative media.
Right.
And it's tiring to go on that trail. I've been on that trail before with Untold History of the United States, which was my 12-hour version in 2012. And I've been on that trail before with Putin interviews.
I would like to know, both of you, John F. Kennedy was super important in your life. So when did he enter your life, and why? What does he represent? Why is he so important to you?
My father was a Republican, so I grew up under that influence. And later in my life, after Vietnam, in the late 70s, I started to hear the other side and understand it because of my experience in Vietnam, where I saw the abuse of humanity. It was the war was wrong, and we could tell from the beginning. Most infantry guys who were intelligent were sensitive, but we kept going. So it was a huge debacle. Yeah. Coming back from that, though, I was in shock. I didn't really understand the implications of it until late 70s, and then through the 80s, reading more and more. And then when Garrison's book was shown to me in 89, or in 87 rather, there was another brick in the wall, right, where I'm saying, this is far more delusional. We're delusional in this country. And I began to work at this thing on a big book. But really, I continued past the assassination into the 2000s when I worked with Peter Kuznick over at American University. He's a historian, on the Untold History of the United States, which goes into 1898 to Obama, which shows you the interventions, the mentality of the empire growing bigger and bigger and worse and worse. So my interest in Kennedy is emotionally was when he died, I was like everyone else, shocked, but I didn't have any attachment to his political program. He was seen by my father as a liberal kind of a guy who would spend government money and spend money. My father was a all-line Republican, intelligent Eisenhower man, so they didn't like Kennedy. Nixon was his man. I made a movie about Nixon too. So I'm working out and I did my Nixon movie was not all bad on him. It shows a human being. The same is true about Kennedy. I've learned more and more about him. Not just his death, but also his life. Right. And I think it's not over for me. I may make another film about Mr. Kennedy's life, his last months, let's say. Oh, wow. Because it's an interesting life. And he's a beautiful figure in the sense of his idealism, but tempered by his sense of what he could get done. He had very practical instincts about getting elected. Like Roosevelt, let's say Franklin Roosevelt was really his mentor. Roosevelt got 4 terms. Kennedy was thinking in terms of power. How do I consolidate this power? How do I get things done? Yeah. How do I get out of Vietnam? How do I change the compass of our relationships with all these countries, including, oh, by the way, I forgot South America, Alliance for Progress. Yeah. He was trying to change so much in foreign affairs, where he could really move. That was his specialty.
Maybe a little too much.
Domestic affairs, he was very good too. Yeah. He was passing the Civil Rights Bill, trying to get it through. And his death actually expedited it, and that's another issue historically. But
so what does he represent to you?
I love the man now.
Yeah,
I understand him. Yeah. I appreciate him as the last American leader who spoke about peace.
Exactly.
None of our presidents since Kennedy have been able to convince me that they're serious about peace. I think Kennedy was killed because he took it too seriously. He was talking about complete détente. He was talking about demilitarizing this country. He was talking about really putting the money into this country, into getting the black people
Yeah.
a fair equity in this experiment we call America. And he was talking about changes on every front.
So he represents peace.
What?
Was he like, when you were in Quebec City, you said that he represents peace, and that peace died that day.
I want to emphasize that how much opposition there is to that point of view. There
Really?
is a whole liberal segment that says Kennedy was just a cold warrior. He came in, we hear his speeches, and you can look at it from that perspective, through that lens, because you'll only, if you pick out the moments where he's trying to work inside a system that's highly aggressive, a system that requires you to be bombing, it requires you to react tough. You can't be soft to be a liberal. So he had to play the game.
That's it.
But they pick it out like Noam Chomsky types.
Right.
But it's unfair to his overall intention, which we deal with.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Say
What about
something
you,
about
Jim?
that.
Yeah.
See, my view of Kennedy had been more or less the standard view of the, like Arthur Schlesinger, Ted Sorensen, that he was a slightly left of center, moderate liberal. Okay, then one day I was in a bookstore down in San Diego, and I picked up this book, JFK Ordeal in Africa, which had this picture of Kennedy. His hand is over his face, he's grimacing with the receiver in his hand. This is the moment he finds out that Patrice Lumumba is killed, has been killed. And I looked at this picture and I said, why is this guy weeping over the death of a black revolutionary in Africa? You know? And so this very much, because I knew Eisenhower would be jumping out of his chair. Okay,
Right.
Johnson would probably be pretty happy too. You know, but here's Kennedy,
Not happy at all.
very unhappy about it. Okay, so this is what I tried to find out, and I spent literally years trying to find it out.
Yeah.
How did this happen? And so in the film, we talk about how Kennedy's meeting in 1951 with Edmund Gullion, and I should also add Seymour Topping. He was a New York Times journalist. And they both told him the same thing. France is not going to win this war. Okay? And this had a momentous impact on Kennedy. And he began to be too out there for the liberals. When he made his Algeria speech, he was attacked by Dean Acheson, the Democratic Secretary of State, and Adlai Stevenson, who had been running for president twice. So when you start getting attacked from what's perceived as the Democratic mainstream, then you're really starting to kind of be out there.
You are.
All right. So to me, what Kennedy symbolized was one guy trying to go ahead and be true to his own instincts about what is best for the United States and also the common man. All right. Kennedy, at the time of his death, was trying to get Medicare through. He was trying to get the Civil Rights Program through.
Yeah.
And he was also talking, if you can believe this, he was talking about universal health care. Okay? There's a speech he makes. He goes, look, almost every country in Western Europe has this. Why does it have to be so strange in this country?
And he was promoting nuclear energy and condemning nuclear weapons.
Weapons. Yeah, we'll talk
And
about it
people
later.
get that confused.
Yeah, but because it's nuclear, so people are panicking.
He was a very progressive
Very
thinker.
progressive, exactly.
A guy named Roger Mattson wrote a book called Stealing the Bomb. Okay?
Yeah, that's a good
And
story.
he interviewed all these people in the CIA. In that book, he says, they all told me nobody was more anti-nuclear proliferation than John F. Kennedy was. This was really a very important issue with him.
And he took on Israel. He took on Ben Gurion in Israel because they were building a bomb that they'd stolen from us. And he really wanted to put a stop to that, but he unfortunately died before. And Johnson carried through, knew about it, and let it go until Israel had the bomb by, 68?
Yes.
And even then, in 68, Johnson shut the Pentagon up. He said, we're not going to announce this so the American people won't know that Israel has the bomb.
That's insane. So let's talk about the actual forensics part of the
Oh,
documentary.
here we go now.
Oh yeah,
I'm staying out of that one.
you are. Okay, he's the pro.
He actually knows us pretty well.
You seem to
he's
know
really
very
kind of modest about that, you know.
Well, my memory. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, well, what I want to know, because there's so much there, and we don't want to spend 3 hours on that, but let's watch the documentary. But let's say I'm buying the official narrative. I do believe in the lone assassin theory. What would you bring to the table to at least make me doubt that maybe there was a plot?
Well, what I tried to do in the film, writing the script, was we concentrated on 3. These were going to be my keystones that I was going to build an archway across.
Because you're the you wrote the screenplay, is that how you call
Yes.
it? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. One of them was the fact that, and this is why we needed Doug Horn in the film, when he interviewed the so-called official autopsy photographer, okay?
That's very interesting.
Him and Jeremy Gunn, who was the chief counsel, put up the pictures of Kennedy's brain that are in the National Archives, all right? And the guy, John Stringer, looked at he actually walked over to the photographs and he started examining the numbers at the bottom, et cetera. Okay, and he says, this isn't the process I used. This is a press pack. That's why they're numbered like this, because they come in a pack.
Right.
And then he says, this is Ansco film.
I don't use that.
I use Kodak.
Wow.
Okay, and so
How
then
long ago was it? Like how long after? Like how many years had passed since he had?
This is like 96, 97.
96, so it's a long time after the assassination. Right. Okay.
And so Jeremy Gunn asked him, are you ready to say that you did not take these pictures? And he said, if that's Ansco and that's a press pack, I didn't take these pictures. Okay, and so I wanted to make this, and I really like the way Oliver handled this, okay? It is a keystone of the film. Because then we talk about, how could this be Kennedy's brain? It's 1,500 grams in weight. The average weight for a brain is 1,330 grams. So you're saying a guy who got his head blown off with all this blood and tissue, flying all in the air, okay, in the back seat on his wife, Jackie Kennedy. She's reaching out the back of the car, trying to grab his brains, which are on the back of the car. And then she brings them to the hospital and gives it to the doctor. You're going to say that brain would be larger in mass?
So a brain that has a big part missing was still bigger than the average.
Yes,
that's what we understand.
And so this is one, and I really like the way Oliver handled this in the film. Okay, then the second thing was going to be the 3 secretaries on the 4th floor.
Yeah.
Okay, Garner, Adams, and Stiles. All right.
Whose testimonies were not in the Warren Commission.
One of them was.
One of them. Okay.
And
one
that
of
was
them
distorted,
was.
though. Right?
Yeah, and they distorted what she said.
Exactly.
Vicky
The whole issue was, how could you, they made them, took them in more than a minute to get down to the stairs. As you know, they ran, 2 of them ran down the stairs right away because they were excited about this whole thing. And one of them stayed up and watched them go down. And the 2 that ran down the stairs didn't see anybody on the stairs right away. How does Oswald go from the 6th floor to the 2nd floor in those 30 seconds?
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question. No
or
answer.
Even in the first minute. And he has to stash the rifle and run across that big floor with all the cartons there. Right. It's not that simple.
No.
How could they not have seen him? Mm-hmm. Especially with Garner staying on the 4th floor. Mm-hmm. Okay? All right. Now, another thing about this, I've been on those stairs, so has he, because when he shot the movie. See, those steps are not what you get in a modern office building, which are kind of short and they usually have some cloth over them or something. Those are the old style rickety wooden steps you've seen in Western movies. It's hard enough to believe that they would not have seen him. It's almost impossible to believe they would not have heard him, okay? And so, and we go into what they did to Vicki Adams to neutralize her testimony, all right? That's how bad the Warren Commission was.
Well, the only fact that there is a cover-up around this should tell you there's something fishy. I mean, It's pretty obvious that they covered up the story. Yes. They changed testimonies. So to me, there is so many proofs that you bring to the table. Why are we still referring to the Warren Commission when we talk about JFK assassination?
Because the media still believes it.
So this is like
The
the
mainstream
official
media
story
still stands by the Warren Commission.
forever. Like it's never
Yeah.
gonna change.
Yeah.
What's it gonna take?
You know.
Well, as I said to you earlier, it would be an admission that
Right.
there was something fishy about the whole thing, and they can't do that.
So you really believe it's never gonna happen?
It's easier to lock, when years go by, it's easier to lock arms and just keep to your position. Our official position is he was killed by a lone assassin. End of story.
End of story.
That was day one.
Right.
That was J. Edgar Hoover, lone assassin. Because the motive apparently was Johnson was very worried about a war with Cuba and or the Soviet Union. Because if there had been any kind of other people involved, it pointed, he thought, to the Soviet Union, which I don't know how he can get there. Because why would the Soviet Union kill Kennedy? He was there. If anything, he was reaching out for the Soviet Union, and he gave a beautiful speech about the sacrifices of the Soviet Union in World War II. He was talking to Khrushchev. There's no motive there.
Right.
Johnson was out of his. I don't think Johnson was involved in the murder, but there's something very awful the way he handled the cover-up.
Right.
Johnson fell for the CIA story coming out of Mexico City.
Can you tell us more about that?
Oswald supposedly visited the Cuban embassy and the Soviet embassy. And when he was at the Soviet embassy, he met with Valery Kostakov, who was supposed to be part of the KGB elimination, undercover as a diplomat. He was really part of the KGB Department 13, which was supposed to be elimination of the opposition. Mm-hmm. And so this story, which has come into, let's put it this way, a lot of disbelief these days, right, that it really was true. Mm-hmm. Okay, this was used. Now, so the question becomes, did Johnson really believe this? Because, see, at the same time the CIA is giving him this story, the FBI, by way of J. Edgar Hoover, is saying, wait a minute, we got this tape from Mexico City. The guys down in Dallas questioning Oswald have heard the tape. They say the voice on the tape does not sound like Oswald. Mm-hmm. And then he says, and we got this picture up here, this is not Oswald either. Okay, so the question becomes, did Johnson really believe this? Yeah. You know, I mean, when he was getting these differing points of view, mm-hmm, you know? We'll
never know.
No. Well, he needed something to get this behind him. He had to legitimize his presidency quickly. He wanted to make it solid. He doesn't want any questions about his becoming president. Right. So he right away get the story out. J. Edgar Hoover says, 3 bullets, 1 assassin.
That's it.
And make he's a communist.
Yeah. And make it work.
It's so like Hillary Clinton after the election saying the Russians stole the election with Donald Trump. I mean, it's just blame the Russians for everything.
Yeah, they're responsible
the same old story.
for a lot.
Russiagate is just as bad as JFK cover-up.
Yeah.
And remember what Alan Dulles said when he was on the Warren Commission. Huh. And they said, do we want to publish all this stuff? And he goes, go ahead and publish it. Nobody reads anymore.
I love that.
There's a few university professors who will read it.
Did he really say that?
Yes. Yeah. But nobody else is going to read it.
A lovable man.
And then Jim Garrison said...
To a certain degree, he's right.
He's right.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, that's the sad part. Yeah. Well, what about more forensic? So you were telling us about 3 keystones. So
yes. And then we were going to use CE399. Okay.
Can you tell us?
Commonly known as the magic bullet. Yeah. And... Cyril Weck does a wonderful talk in the film. The forensic pathologist out of Pittsburgh did a wonderful talk about, see, what we wanted to concentrate on was, number one, could a projectile that went through 2 people and did all the damage that the Warren Commission said, could it emerge in such an intact, composition as it looks like in the film? Mm-hmm. All right, and that's when we put Joseph Dolce in there, who actually worked for the Warren Commission. And he said, look, we fired dozens and dozens of these bullets through animal corpses. Okay, none of them came out,
Only 1 wound, and then you get 7 with the magic bullet.
Okay, as Oliver did so well in JFK, this bullet supposed to went through 2 people. It was supposed to have smashed 2 bones.
Right.
Okay, a rib and a radius, or excuse me,
The
a wrist
wrist,
bone.
yeah.
Okay, and it's supposed to have then turned and entered into Connolly's left thigh. All right. Could it really have done all this, all right, making 7 wounds in 2 people and emerge in the condition it did? I don't think so.
Well, the only fact that we're talking about it and we're asking if it could have happened, to me, is blowing my mind. Of course not. I mean, it's a common sense, period.
And then the other thing we did, and then I was so glad to get Henry Lee in the film. Henry Lee is probably the most illustrious criminalist in the United States, maybe the world.
Wow.
Okay, all right. And he was talking about chain of custody.
Yeah.
Okay, and that little speech he gives, it's about 30 seconds long, is worth the whole movie. Okay, the way he does it with that accent and that very calm demeanor about it begins at the crime scene, not the police department, at the crime scene. And then you go to the police department, everything has to be checked in, and you got to put your name on it, day and time, okay? Then it goes into the evidence room. And again, it has to be checked in again. And then when it's checked out, again, everything has to be out in the open. And if you don't do that, you run the risk of the defense trying to get it declared inadmissible, all right? And by the way, he was a captain in Taiwan. I didn't know this till I interviewed him. I did a pre-interview with him out at Malibu, okay? He was a captain in the police force in Taiwan for 5 years. And when he said that, I said, then you must know all about chain of custody.
Of course.
Okay, and so we got him, to appear in the film and talk about it. And I think Brian Edwards was the other guy. He used to be a policeman. So we tried to get professional people who are actually in the field talking about these subjects.
Experts.
Yes.
Who know what they're talking about. Yeah. So at least when we watch this documentary, we feel like it sheds light onto what maybe we'll never officially know, but at least it feels like we have answers, and that feels good. Because for those of us who want to know the truth, it is very frustrating to feel like we're being lied to all the time.
Yes,
all
you
the
are.
time. Yes, this is so frustrating.
This is a psychological torture that we're going through at the hands of our own government.
I know, and it's all legal. They do whatever they want.
And the Canadians are just as bad.
Oh my God, don't get me started. Don't get me started. Yeah, it's been really rough lately.
America wants to go here. Okay, here we come.
Yeah, I know.
We'll send troops over there.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting to see how the Kennedys were dangerous to the establishment.
Yes.
Not only John
It's
F.
a
Kennedy.
war machine because that's where the money is.
So why were they so dangerous?
Why were
come
they
on.
a danger to the power elite?
Come
Is that
on,
what
do
you're
you think
saying?
Robert Kennedy was going to reopen the files? He was going to go into it again. I mean, that's the great untold thing because, of course, they won't say he was really committed to it, but he was. And his son is, various people have convinced me that Robert Kennedy was not fooling around. He wanted to go in and really get back into this case. Not the only thing he wanted to do. He wanted civil rights. He had a whole agenda, a progressive agenda. He was a very important figure. But believe me, he was Attorney General. He knew that he couldn't do anything after Johnson came in. They cut his balls off, basically. And he didn't want to. Also, he was grieving. It was very painful for him. At the same time, and he didn't support the Garrison trial at all. He was, on the contrary, he worked hard against it.
Why?
Which is because he thought Garrison was a cowboy and shooting too many loose cannons without backup. And there's some truth to that, but on the other hand, Garrison did have some very solid stuff that did come out in the trial.
Right.
So Bobby was being deceived by some of the people around him who didn't like Jim, like Walter Sheridan, who didn't like what Jim Garrison was doing. Okay. But he always had an open mind about, maybe there is something there. All right. See, the other thing, I think
Well, for the first thing he said was they.
yes, yeah. In the
Tell the
long
story.
version,
Right.
in the long version of the film, we have a lot of this in there. See, David Talbot, who's one of our main interview subjects, did a book about this called Brothers. Okay, and
Very good
he
book.
outlines all the things that Bobby Kennedy did that day and how he never lost interest in what had really happened to his brother. And he was now, once on the eve of the presidency, he was going to try and reopen the case. The other thing that the death of Bobby Kennedy caused was the extension of the Vietnam War. Bobby Kennedy in 1968 was about as radical as you can get and still be in the arena. That's how far out he was getting,
Wow.
okay? And this jihad against the Vietnam War, okay? You know, he was getting out one way or the other. And so his assassination solved two problems. Number one, no reopening of the Kennedy case. And number two, we can extend the Vietnam War now.
And it's all about money at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So let's close with that. I would like to hear you, in your opinion, who did it and why? Are we allowed to go there?
Well, we point to Allen Dulles as the main executioner, but that's not to say it doesn't go higher than Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles is ultimately a government servant, and he's a competent one. He's been around for years. He's done a lot of coups, done a lot of assassinations. He knows the score, and he believes in a certain order, the world order of things, which is American-centric empire, and he's good at it. And of course, he's fired by Kennedy because he's not really good at it. He's really a screw up. He screws up the Bay of Pigs, but he's fired. But he's still the old man, and he's very much respected by the intelligence community. Kennedy's mistake is not to have cleaned out the CIA. He fired the top 3 people, but he left all the Dulles lovers in there, and there were a lot of them in the CIA. Not to say that the whole agency was corrupt, but there was enough people involved in this case that they were going to each covering each other's ass. And we mention a few of them in the film.
Yeah.
From George Joinides to Phillips, David Phillips. David Phillips, right?
Yes.
Yeah, he's a key player in my mind. Bill Harvey, another one. These people were around, and their files still exist, by the way, I think, unless they destroyed them. But I think there's a lot of information there. But aside from that, Dulles is the executioner. He takes care of the details with Helms or whoever. His people.
Even Helms?
On another level, he does get the okay from somebody because you can't go ahead with this and just do that.
You think
Even
so?
No, he can't.
So you don't think he was the top?
You can't be a renegade here. This is an old theory, like, oh yeah, I was rogue agents. You can't be a rogue in a situation like this. This is a public execution.
Right.
Why do it like that? With it blow his head off in Dallas at high noon. You've got to get.
Go ahead.
You're going to have people on your side or not.
Yeah.
You have to have backup.
So that would mean that there was someone
So the cover-up itself is an acknowledgement that they were going along with it. They wanted it to be clean.
Right.
So, when you talk to the top people, you know who they are. They're people with money. These are, you got to get permission from people with money.
Not the government.
The government doesn't exist aside from that. I'm talking about talking to people. I don't want to name names, but, I always wondered, I met David Rockefeller. I wondered, do you talk to him?
Interesting.
And do you talk to people like that, the people who run the agricultural industries, the steel business,
those who really got the power, basically.
The banks too.
Exactly. Yeah. Those who have the money and the power.
Yeah, I'm sure Wall Street, to some degree, plays a role here.
So the mafia, just a small player.
Well, that's mafia. You don't go to one person in the mafia. They had ties to various people. They've used them in the past, going back to Luciano in the 40s. The question is, of course, you use them on a smaller job, like Jack Ruby. You use them to clean up things. But I can't imagine using them in any way as a serious. Yeah. They're not going to be able to control the scene the way the government can control it. All those people that were in Dealey Plaza that day with badges, these are not mafia people. These are government people.
Yeah, yeah. Do you agree with that?
Well, in the film, we have a couple of indications about who was behind it. Okay, and one of them, as he says so eloquently, is what would be Allen Dulles. Okay, and David Talbot in his book *The Devil's Chessboard* outlines his ideas about Dulles's involvement. All right. The other thing that we had was Curtis LeMay.
I was going to say that.
Curtis LeMay lying about where he was that day. Secondly,
smoking the cigar.
Disobeying orders about where he was supposed to fly in. He was supposed to land at Andrews Air Force Base, but all the media was at Andrews Air Force Base, so he went over to National, the small one nobody was at, and which closer to the morgue. And then he goes in that night, okay, and he's standing in the gallery, and Jim Humes, the pathologist, tells Paul O'Connor, tell that guy over there to put his cigar out. And Paul O'Connor goes over there, and he looks, and he sees it's Curtis LeMay, and LeMay blows some smoke in his face. Okay, and he comes back, goes, Jim, I can't tell that guy to put his cigarettes. It's Curtis LeMay. Okay, so there's some shorthand about how the CIA and the Joint Chiefs, who very, very against not just John F. Kennedy the person, but what he was doing, were very likely, because remember, this is the day of, okay, the day as it's happening, and this guy's flying around Canada and the United States, ending up at the morgue, and
With
nobody,
a cigar.
do you believe this? In all the years that I've researched this, nobody ever asked him about this. Nobody ever asked him about it. That's the kind of investigation the Kennedy assassination got.
It's interesting that, as you know, George Wallace in Alabama was no friend of Kennedy because of his integration of the schools there, and he makes the prophecy in the movie we put it in that somebody's going to be against him. He's not going to get reelected. The South is not going to be for Kennedy. It's interesting that in '68, when he runs against Nixon, he becomes a third-party candidate. Who's his vice presidential candidate? Curtis LeMay.
Oh, wow.
So LeMay hooks up with George
Yeah.
Wallace. I'm just saying it's an ironic footnote to this whole affair. I don't know about this. I'm not sure. But I do think, obviously, Cubans, huge amount of Cubans were involved because they were the tools. They had the radicalism necessary to go for it.
Right.
So you can use them in any capacity you want as part of a plan. Among them, working with Oswald, you could use them as a red flag too. They could be a subterfuge.
There's so much to talk about, so I would highly recommend people just go and watch the documentary. It's available, you can buy on Amazon, or you can also buy the book. Yeah, and you can also stream it on Amazon as well.
Right. You can stream the documentary on Amazon at a very reasonable price. Okay.
Highly recommend.
And you can buy the DVD package, okay, which I think is also Blu-ray. And there's also a commentary included. Me and Oliver did a commentary on the shorter version. And so we excerpted what we had to cut, and we put it into the book. And there's over 200 pages of those excerpts in the book.
So it's like a compliment to the documentary.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you so much for your time.
Eloise.
Okay, thank you, Eloise.
Merci.